Nigeria Labour Congress State Chairman to meet governors over new minimum wage. World Bank approves Nigeria's $3 billion power sector loan. In international news, UK Prime Minister pushes for another vote in Parliament on his Brexit deal.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. State Chairman of the Nigeria Labour Congress is set to meet in Enugu on Tuesday to discuss the modalities to be adopted with state governments for negotiations on consequential adjustments of the new minimum wage beginning this week in different states. ANN reported last week on the agreements between the federal government and organized labor on the percentage increase on the consequential adjustments in workers' salaries as a result of the new minimum wage of 30,000 naira. After impeaching Kogi Deputy Governor Simon Achuba last week, Edward David Onoja has been sworn in as new Deputy Governor. Achuba was impeached shortly after the State Assembly received the report of the panel set up to investigate allegations of gross misconduct against him. Achuba says his impeachment is unconstitutional and is on his way to the courts to challenge it. The federal government says the World Bank has finally approved a 3 billion naira loan, described as Jollof Bond, for the expansion of the power transmission and distribution networks in the industry. Finance Minister Zainab Ahmed said this while addressing journalists on the outcome of Nigeria's participation at the annual meetings of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. Jollof bonds are issued offshore but denominated in local currency. The importance of such a transaction is that it protects the issuing country from exchange rate exposure. Ahmed said apart from the UK, the federal government had also received proposals from Deutsche Bank of the Netherlands as well as the World Bank on the need for Naira-denominated bond. The Nigerian Communications Commission has authorized Airtel Networks to partially disconnect Globacom from its network effective next Monday. The regulatory agency said the approval was because Globacom has failed to settle interconnect debt to Airtel. A partial disconnection will make it impossible for Glo subscribers to make calls to Airtel numbers, but will be able to receive calls from the network. Telecom operators settle interconnect bills through NCC-licensed clearinghouses. The bills are generated from charges for calls from a particular network that terminates on another network. NCC says the disconnection will be enforced until otherwise determined by the Commission. Mining of minerals in Nigeria accounts for less than 1% of its GDP because of the influence of its vast oil resources. Although there have been some interesting developments in the country's mining sector in the last 2 years, most of its potential remains untapped. Reporter Kelechi Emekalam explores how this can change.
An array of some of Nigeria's finest precious stones and mineral resources, all under one roof. Nigeria's mining sector has been identified as a viable option for economic diversification, and the country is repositioning itself as the next destination for investors.
We want to assure all prospective investors that we are willing to cooperate and give them the necessary backing to thrive in this economy. The federal government is relaunching the economy on the path of inclusive and sustainable growth through the Economy Recovery Growth Plan, ERGP. The plan is aimed at increasing national productivity and achieving sustainable diversification of the economy through the mining sector.
There are sufficient mineral resources in Nigeria to kickstart a boom in the industry. However, funding, insecurity, poor infrastructure and weak regulations are some of the problems facing the growth of the sector. Illegal mining too has been thriving, and government has not been able to harness the enormous potential from the mining sector.
The quick way for the government to benefit from these resources is by virtue of taxing the companies that mine these resources. And we're currently going through a major tax reform in the country to have a tax system that is more straightforward and more easily enforced. So that's the first step. I think the second step as well is having proper coordination between the states and the federal government in terms of knowing who these miners are, what they are mining, where they are mining, and being able to get their share of whatever proceeds come from those mines.
Mining contributes about 0.5% to the country's GDP. Nigeria's mining roadmap is targeting a 3% contribution by 2025. Investors and other stakeholders here are hopeful for the future of this thriving industry as a viable alternative for economic diversification.
Coming up, African news. South Sudan opposition leader Riek Machar threatens he may not participate in the unity government. And later, international news. Brexit bill takes center stage in UK House of Commons.
This used to be me. But that was before I got the perfect bag. It's handy and easy to use. All I need in one compact space, just like my MTN Extra Value plan. I used to get one plan for my calls and then try to remember which data plan worked for me. Roaming was a totally different ballgame. Not anymore. I've got the MTN Extra Value all-in-one plan. If you're a data buff like me, you get extra data with some talk time. And if you like to make calls, you get extra talk time with some data. And when I'm abroad, I automatically browse, chat, and call right on the same plan. MTN Extra Value was made just for me.
More of data or calls, whichever one you prefer. MTN Extra Value is made just for you.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to African stories. Mozambique's main opposition party, Renamo, has accused the ruling Frelimo party of violating a peace deal the both signed. It says the Frelimo has been using violence and intimidation to pursue political objectives. So it is calling for the cancellation of last Tuesday's presidential, legislative and provincial elections it says have been marred by massive fraud. But just under half of the votes counted, incumbent President Filipe Nyusi is reported to have scored more than 60% of the votes, while Renamo party candidate Yusufo Momade is tottering at below 30%. Frelimo claims the elections were fair, free and transparent and would not affect the peace agreement. The country was counting on these elections to re-establish peace between Renamo and Frelimo, who have been at war for decades. A commission has been named on Sunday by Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok to probe the killings that occurred during a raid on a sit-in protest in Khartoum in June. Dozens of protesters were killed by security forces near the Defense Ministry in the capital. Protest and civilian groups have repeatedly called for justice. State news agency SUNA reports the commission will have broad powers to summon witnesses, including officials. It will also be given access to official documents, security reports, and medical records. The Sudanese Professionals Association, which spearheaded the demonstrations leading to the overthrow of ex-President Omar al-Bashir in April, has welcomed the appointment of the commission, which will be headed by human rights lawyer Nabil Adeb. It will also include senior security officers as well as other lawyers. The announcement of the commission's appointment came late on Sunday, a day before a planned mass rally by the Sudanese Professionals Association. SUNA says the commission will be charged with identifying those responsible for breaking up the sit-in, as well as establishing the number of dead, wounded, and missing, and the financial losses incurred by those affected. The price of bread in Zimbabwe has shot up by 60% overnight, causing a huge blow to a population that is already suffering under spiraling living costs. Zimbabweans are finding it difficult to keep pace with the price hikes, which have rekindled fears of hyperinflation that reached 500 billion% a decade ago and forced the country to do away with its own currency. Farai Uwakutuya reports from Harare.
Recently, supplies have been short as bakers held out for an increase, citing escalating production costs. Now that it's been affected, bread is readily available again, but unaffordable for many.
For someone who is working, maybe a doctor, maybe a teacher, he cannot afford bread because automatically their pay is below par.
I've got 6 children, but I can't buy bread for the children. That's all.
So what are you going to do now?
Nothing.
No options?
No.
Resort to eating something else?
Yeah, we can. There's nothing we can buy because everything has gone up.
A Bulawayo-based consumer rights watchdog described this latest increase as simply devastating, but says it's symptomatic of the general malaise that is afflicting this economy.
The cost of fuel has gone up. We appreciate that. We do agree with that. The cost of energy has gone up. It is a factor, it's a cost driver. Both are inflationary in nature. They get the prices up at the end of the day.
Zimbabwe is in the throes of its worst economic crisis in a decade, characterized by triple-digit inflation and shortages of fuel, energy, and cash. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has called for patience to address the challenges, but insists the country is heading in the right direction, much to the frustration of embattled consumers.
What they are talking about probably is just the figures and the direction. We are not worried about the direction. We want to get to a destination where we can afford bread, we can afford meat, we can afford meat, we can afford the cost of education when it comes to our children, the cost of health care and everything else. It's not just a few basic commodities, but our way of life has to change.
A number of labor unions have threatened to strike, demanding US dollar-linked salaries, arguing the value of their Zimbabwe dollar pay has been wiped out by inflation.
In just under a month, South Sudan opposition leader Riek Machar and President Salva Kiir are expected to form a unity government after a 5-year civil war. Machar has met with President Kiir over the weekend, but told a visiting UN Security Council delegation on Sunday he probably won't be a part of the unity government in November. This puts a damper on hopes the peace would hold. Patrick Oyets reports.
This meeting is expected to come up with a way forward on forming a new government in South Sudan by the November 12th deadline. President Salva Kiir's government says the unity government should be formed as scheduled in the agreement.
The meeting was to see the way forward, discuss all the other outstanding issues that are connected with the implementation of the agreement. And among them is, of course, the security arrangements.
However, opposition leader Riek Machar wants some key parts of the agreement fully implemented before installing a unity government. One contentious issue is the number of states in the country. Riek Machar's group wants 10 administrative units instead of the current 32. The opposition also insists that it wants an overhaul of the security sector before forming a unity government.
We should unify and train and redeploy unified forces. That's why we put it as a condition for SPLMIO to form the government of national unity. You need to solve the issues of security arrangement.
When we return, international news. Brexit vote takes center stage in UK House of Commons. And later, sports. Nigeria fails to qualify for CHAN 2020.
Welcome back. This is CNN News. Now to world events. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has tried and failed again today as his bid to put his plan for Britain's exit from the European Union to a meaningful vote in the House of Commons was disallowed by the Speaker, John Becker. The Speaker said his refusal to allow a debate on the motion today is because it would have been repetitive and disorderly to do so. Johnson also suffered a stunning loss on Saturday when his dream of being on the verge of a breakthrough was resoundingly crushed. Lawmakers voted to delay final approval of the agreement until after Parliament passes the detailed legislation to enact it. That would ensure there wouldn't be a no-deal Brexit. With just 10 days left until the UK is due to leave the EU on October the 31st. The divorce is again in disarray as Britain's political class argue over whether to leave with a deal, exit without a deal, or hold another referendum. Although Johnson hammered out a deal in grilling talks with EU officials last week, the Speaker has dealt the Prime Minister another blow by disallowing a vote on the deal today. Since the vote did not happen, the government will have to try to push on with the legislation needed for ratification of the Prime Minister's deal. But that could expose Johnson to attempts by opponents to wreck the agreement. U.S. troops have crossed into Iraq early on Monday as part of a withdrawal from northeastern Syria ordered by President Donald Trump. The order opened the way for Turkish troops to launch an offensive against Kurdish fighters in the area. Reuters is reporting more than 100 vehicles crossing from the northeastern tip of Syria, where Turkey has agreed to purse its offensive for 5 days under a deal agreed between Washington and Ankara. The truce expires late on Tuesday. Armored vehicles have been carrying U.S. troops through the Sahel border crossing into Iraq's northern province of Dohuk. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said on Saturday all of the nearly 1,000 troops withdrawing from northern Syria are expected to move to western Iraq to continue the campaign against Islamic State militants and to help defend Iraq. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has warned that Ankara will resume its military assault in Syria when the deadline expires if the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have not pulled back from its proposed safe zone spanning the border. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has apologized to the city's Muslim community on Monday after police fired a water cannon at a major mosque during operations on Sunday night to quell violent pro-democracy protests in the Asian financial hub. While the morning after cleanup was underway, Lam covered her head with a shawl and visited the mosque in Kowloon district to express her regrets to Islamic leaders over the incident. During running battles in Kowloon on Sunday, police used tear gas and water cannon trucks to disperse petrol bomb-throwing protesters, spraying jets of blue dye into the crowds. In one instance, a cannon dredged the front gates and footpath in front of the Kowloon Mosque, Hong Kong's most important Islamic place of where a few had gathered, including journalists. Chief Imam Mohammed Ashar says Lam's apology was accepted and that Islamic community hoped to continue living peacefully in Hong Kong. Police said in a statement the mosque had been accidentally sprayed and that they respect religious freedom and will strive to protect all places of worship. Now back to Brexit. The fear that the UK could leave the European Union without a deal has gripped many British factories, and some of them are now looking for ways to stay in business if their fears were realized. One of them is a chocolate manufacturer. Reporter Jenny Longdon has the details.
Chocolate is big business in Belgium. More than 700,000 tonnes of it is boxed up every year and exported around the world. But with one of the country's biggest markets on the brink of crashing out of the European Union without a deal, how can producers here ensure British trade continues smoothly?
Up to 75 tonnes of chocolate is produced in this factory every single day, and their biggest market is the UK. 15% of the products from here are exported there. So it's vital that this chocolatier has contingency plans in the event of a no-deal Brexit.
They've been filling up warehouses in Britain, making sure they have enough products to sell to customers.
In order to limit the risks, we have been starting building stocks. So we have increased the production. We obviously had to buy earlier the chocolate, we had to buy earlier the packaging, and we are now increasing our stock levels in our warehouse in the UK so that we can avoid to ship too many products in those last weeks of October when there is a lot of uncertainty. We just would not like to fall out of stock or to have our trucks waiting at the port or at Calais.
They're not the only ones. Export figures from Belgium's food and drinks industry federation FIVIA have found that over the last 4 years, exports to the UK rose by 8%. But in the first 3 months of this year, exports were up 16% on the year before.
It's a very important market. It's our fifth market. It's representing about 10% of our total exports. To give you an idea, it's about 2.2 billion euros. That's a substantial amount of export, and it's been a growth market for us. It's a market with a lot of potential. So we hope that we can continue to tap into that potential.
But with yet another Brexit deadline looming, the Federation says export figures are starting to slow.
The stock building that the UK retailers have been doing last year, that they're not continuing to do that again over and over, obviously because it would be expensive for them. It was a one-time increase, let's say, but in the long run, obviously, Brexit is and remains a huge threat for the Belgian food industry.
This chocolatier is watching closely to see if a deal is made and what that means for trade with its biggest market. But in the short term, they're making sure they have enough chocolate to sell in the UK in the run-up to Christmas.
Still ahead, sport. Nigeria Eagles B failed to qualify for CHAN 2020. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. This is CNN News. In sports, the 2019 Lagos Open Tennis Championships will end on Sunday. Final matches will start with women's singles. Men's singles will follow immediately. The Lagos Open Tennis, which was formerly known as the Governor's Cup Lagos Tennis, is an annual tournament organized to celebrate the sitting governor of Lagos State since the administration of Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu. This year's tournament is the first to be held since Governor Sanwo-Olu assumed office in May. The governor is expected to watch the men's singles final and to declare the tournament closed. Sanwo-Olu will be accompanied to the final ceremony by members of the Lagos State Executive Council, including Deputy Governor Femi Hamzat and Commissioner for Youth, Sports and Social Development, Segun Dawodu. Super Eagles Team B, also called CHAN Eagles, have failed to qualify for the 2020 edition of the African Nations Championship to be held in Cameroon. Nigeria have featured at the championship 3 times, finishing 3rd place in their debut edition in 2014 in South Africa. They crashed out in the group stage at the 2016 edition in Rwanda and finished 2nd last year in Morocco. CHAN is reserved exclusively for the continent's home-based players on the continent.